catastrophic storm, widespread destruction as Hurricane Harvey pounds the Gulf Coast of Texas, leaving hundreds of thousands without power, prompting rescues and predictions of unprecedented flooding in the days ahead. Tonight, we'll meet some who lost just about everything as the threat from Harvey is far from over. Presidential pardon, the controversial move by President Trump, pardoning former Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Arizona. Black Hawk Down, yet another crash involving a U.S. military aircraft. The search tonight for a missing service member. Palace threat. Police launch a terror investigation after a man with a sword injures 3 officers outside Buckingham Palace. And Hype Night, the spectacle in Las Vegas as Mayweather and McGregor battle it out tonight, raking in hundreds of millions, no matter who wins. Nightly News begins right now.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, reporting tonight from Rockport, Texas.
Good evening. After staring into the evil eye of Harvey and taking the hurricane's most ferocious shot, Rockport, Texas tonight is bruised and battered, and it's not over yet. Right now, a brief break between bands of rain, but like much of this region, it's now experiencing unrelenting rains and a catastrophic flood threat growing by the hour. Tonight, Harvey is back down to a tropical storm after thundering ashore overnight as a surprisingly strong Cat 4 hurricane. But rather than moving on, it is lingering along the Texas coast. Its rains flooding highways and cutting off access to stricken areas. Homes and buildings have collapsed in some places, boats ripped from their moorings, power lines and trees are down, and cell communications have been cut across broad areas. Our correspondents and crews have navigated through some of the worst of it today, and our reporting begins with Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe?
Lester, good evening. You can see the power of this storm. Harvey's eye cut right through here. Local authorities say that 1 person was killed in a house fire that first responders just couldn't get to in time. At least 12 people were injured. Tonight, along the Texas Gulf Coast, utter devastation. In the town of Rockport, entire blocks are decimated.
We have nothing left.
And Amanda Evans is shaken. She was caught in the eye of the storm.
By 1 o'clock, it was terrible. It was so, I was crying. I was on my knees praying that we made it.
Her home gone.
Why didn't you evacuate?
We just didn't have the money.
Harvey barreled ashore overnight, packing 130-mile-an-hour winds, blinding sheets of rain, and a treacherous storm surge.
We have been praying for quite a while now for the eye to pass over so we could get some kind of a break.
All right, this is bad.
The Category 4 hurricane is the strongest to hit the U.S. in 13 years, making landfall twice. Now search and rescue efforts are underway. The Coast Guard called in to rescue at least 3 tugboats stranded offshore.
We want to do everything we possibly can to keep people out of rising water.
The whipping winds ripped roofs off buildings. Power lines snapped, sparking massive explosions. Electricity knocked out for at least 300,000.
Our town was destroyed, and it hurts.
On the Bolivar Peninsula, 3 homes burned to the ground.
It was pretty scary. It felt like 150-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, it was whipping pretty good.
KXAN meteorologist David Yeomans rode out the storm at this Rockport hotel, designed to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. But overnight, an entire wall collapsed.
The owner's a little nervous because half of the building's apparently missing. We're just taking our first look at it.
Incredibly, no one was hurt.
You can see the town.
Today, the hotel's manager showed us a view he never expected.
This would have actually been the wall that you can see that is still literally hanging. It just kind of flipped over on itself, and half of it ended down there.
But the cleanup can't begin just yet. Harvey has already dumped several months' worth of rain on the region, and the storm is far from over. As the torrential rains move north, authorities here in Rockport are only just beginning to assess the damage. Texas's governor says more than 1,000 workers throughout the state are now involved in search and rescue operations. Lester?
All right, Gabe, thank you. There is the potential for much more rain, up to 2 feet or more, as the storm remains largely stalled for the next several days. Dylan Dreyer is here with us. And Dylan, for several hours, unrelenting rain. And then you get these moments like this and you think it's over.
And then you get another band of really heavy rain. It's because the storm is stalled right now, and that rain is just pinwheeling around different areas across this part of Texas. So you can see where the storm is. Don't be fooled by the fact that it is now a tropical storm. It's not the winds going on from here on out, those 65-mile-per-hour winds. Look at the movement. It's stationary, and that's what's going to be a huge issue. We have the Gulf of Mexico feeding into these bands of rain, and they will continue to rotate around the center of the storm over the next several days. The storm doesn't start moving until Monday afternoon, and even then it slowly moves to the north. In fact, the diameter of this little circular path it's taking is only about 150 miles, so it's staying put. It's going to continue to feed into the moisture off the Gulf of Mexico, and that's why we are going to see another widespread 10 to 20 inches of rain, with some areas ending up with those totals around 40 inches. And again, this is going to be an issue all the way through at least the middle of next week.
And before you know it, it's flooded. We learned a little while ago that the route we took in here now is impassable.
Exactly, because all the water that accumulates on the sidewalks and the roads, once it trickles down, it goes into the rivers and streams, and then they overflow their banks, and then we end up with more flooding.
All right, Dylan Dreyer. Dylan, thank you. The town of Victoria, Texas, was also hard hit. It's inland, about 65 miles or so north of where we are. NBC's Kerry Sanders is there. Kerry, what is the situation there this evening?
Lester, Harvey's already dumped about 10 inches of rain here, and you can see the spillways and culverts are nearing their capacity. As residents here in Victoria begin to assess the damage, the growing worry now is a coming flood. Streams and creeks overwhelming their banks, all of it flowing into the bulging Guadalupe River. The best way to look at that is from above. Take a look at the drone shot here. With 20 to 30 inches of rain forecast to fall here before Harvey is gone, water managers expect by Wednesday the river to crest 32 feet above flood stage. Residents who live along the river in the area are concerned not only about the flood, about the fact also that they do not have flood insurance. On top of all of that, because of the power outage, there is now a mandatory boil water alert for drinking water. Lester?
All right, Kerry Sanders, thank you. And there is growing concern this evening in Houston, which has already been hit by almost 1.5 feet of rain, with much more on the way. And now tornadoes have started touching down. The city preparing for the worst tonight. We get that part of the story from NBC's Jacob Rascone, who is there tonight.
Hey, come here, hurry, run, because we're going to go inside.
Tonight in Houston, the immediate threat is not catastrophic flooding, but tornadoes. This one reported in North Houston, while another south of town devastated the Roddy family home. At least 50 homes damaged, gaping holes in roofs, windows shattered, trees uprooted.
And all of a sudden, I felt boom, 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 and boom.
85-year-old Rosa was fast asleep.
And what did you think? What did you see? Was it pitch black?
Jesus, help us. That's what I said. I said that because I was afraid.
But tonight, the worst in Houston is yet to come. Nearby in Rosenberg, the first mandatory evacuations now ordered as the Brazos River rises. Already more rain than predicted fell today, nearly 1 foot in some areas. The fear, another 3 feet could fall in parts of the city through the end of the storm, in an area that's already prone to flooding.
The worst case scenario is that there's no place for it to go but outside of its banks, and then if it runs outside of its banks, it then runs in, it would then go into people's homes.
Houston's bayous, creeks, and rivers are rising fast. The Maid Creek overflowed just overnight.
Been in the house for 37 years. It's not a common thing, but it does happen occasionally.
How concerned are you that it will flood?
We're always very concerned.
The nation's 4th largest city all but shut down. This is the Buffalo Bayou. It goes right through the heart of Houston. And with such a dire forecast, there are now fears how much longer it will stay within its banks. Lester?
Jacob Rascone tonight. President Trump has been monitoring the situation here closely, but there's also a new political storm we're following, this one over the president's pardon of former Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Arizona. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell has the latest now from the White House.
Today's White House hurricane response is headquartered at Camp David, where President Trump led a teleconference with the vice president and cabinet members that directed his federal team to remain fully engaged and positioned to support his #1 priority of saving lives. Notably upbeat on Twitter, President Trump wrote, "We are leaving nothing to chance, and we have fantastic people on the ground. So far, so good." The president authorized emergency federal money for Texas after Governor Abbott's request.
We are so pleased that the federal government and the White House have stepped up in the strong way they have by granting our disaster declaration.
From a first natural disaster on President Trump's watch to gale force political wins he whipped up, granting his first presidential pardon.
I'm not going to stop.
Arizona's controversial sheriff Joe Arpaio defied a judge's order and was convicted of contempt for failing to halt immigration patrols. Arpaio, who lost re-election, was long accused of harsh tactics and racial profiling that targeted Latinos. His reaction?
I have to thank the President of the United States for his pardon. As I say, he's a big friend, supporter of law enforcement. I think this is a bigger picture than just me.
Arpaio's fate is tied to the president's tough stand on illegal immigration that fires up his base, praising the former sheriff as a patriot. His critics, including prominent Democrats, claim the pardon condones racism, while Arizona's Republican senators say the president undercut the rule of law.
And President Trump acted on his own. This pardon did not go through the usual review process at the Department of Justice. Sheriff Arpaio is not expressing the usual remorse for his conviction. He calls it vindication. And by announcing the pardon on a Friday night amid all the attention around the hurricane, critics say the president used the storm for political cover. Lester?
Kelly O'Donnell at the White House tonight. Thank you. Tonight, the U.S. military is investigating yet another military air crash, this one involving a Black Hawk helicopter. Last night, while on a training exercise, one service member is missing. This is just the latest accident involving U.S. military aircraft and ships. It happened off the coast of Yemen, and we get more from our Pentagon correspondent, Hans Nichols.
Tonight, the urgent search and rescue mission still underway for one missing Special Ops soldier. 5 have already been rescued after an Army Black Hawk helicopter went down during a training mission off the coast of Yemen. The helicopter was hovering about 10 feet above the water, practicing its hoisting, when it suddenly lost power and slowly crashed into the water, then turned on its side. The crash just the latest in a series of deadly U.S. military aviation accidents, including in Mississippi and Australia. Earlier this month, another Black Hawk helicopter went down 2 miles offshore from Oahu. And also a deadly season at sea, 2 Navy destroyers involved in collisions in the Pacific.
There are too many coincidences here to demonstrate anything other than the fact that we are not training sufficiently, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough time, and we don't have enough resources.
Next month, Congress will hold a public hearing to determine if some of these accidents are related and whether or not they stem from budget cuts. Hans Nichols, NBC News, Washington.
In London, police are trying to determine whether an attack outside Buckingham Palace was carried out by a terrorist. It happened last night, and NBC's Kristen Dahlgren is in London and has details. Kristen, good evening.
Good evening, Lester. Tonight, people here in London are being urged to be alert but not alarmed as police now investigate the incident at Buckingham Palace as an act of terror. Metropolitan Police say on Friday night a man drove a car directly at a police van. When officers confronted him, they say he reached for a 4-foot sword, repeatedly shouting Allahu Akbar. 3 officers were slightly injured subduing him. They believe the man was acting alone. No members of the royal family were in the palace at the time, and none of the many tourists gathered outside were injured. The 26-year-old man is being held under the Terrorism Act. The attack came the same night a soldier was attacked in Brussels. ISIS has now claimed responsibility for that attack, Lester.
Kristen Dahlgren in our London newsroom. Thanks. Still ahead tonight after Hurricane Harvey, the highly personal stories, including the experience of one man I met who survived but lost a big part of his life. Also the showdown in Las Vegas as Mayweather and McGregor battle it out tonight. Who comes out on top in the money game?